In this lesson, we'll learn how to tackle flawed argument questions on the GMAT. These questions provide us with a complete but flawed argument, and the answer choices consist of explanations of the possible flaws. Your job is to find the answer choice that best describes the primary problem with the argument. As always, we recognize a flawed argument question by reading the question stem first. Some examples of question stems that indicate a flawed argument question include: which of the following identifies the most serious logical flaw in the argument above? Which one of the following best identifies the error in reasoning made in the passage? The argument is vulnerable to criticism on which of the following grounds? And the reasoning in the argument is not sound because it fails to establish that. In all of these question stems, we are essentially asked to identify the main problem with the argument. Okay, so now that we know how to recognize flawed argument questions, let's learn how to tackle them. The first step is to identify and summarize the conclusion and the premises. Next, once we have reduced the entire argument to a handful of words, we should try to identify any unstated assumptions. This is a useful step, since the argument may contain a flaw in one of the underlying assumptions. Next, determine the argument's primary flaw. In a moment, we'll examine some common flaws to watch out for. Now, the most important part of step 3 is to identify the flaw before checking the answer choices. Otherwise, you will waste considerable time checking the answers. Now, at this point, once you have identified the primary flaw, look for your answer among the answer choices, and be sure to check every answer choice. Okay, so that's the basic strategy for handling flawed argument questions. Now let's examine some common flaws to watch out for. The first flaw is confusing causation with correlation. Here, the author takes two events that seem to occur together, and then concludes that one must cause the other. For example, Ben observed that during heat waves, the public beach is overcrowded, and on cold days, it is not overcrowded. Therefore, overcrowding the beach causes heat waves. In this example, although beach overcrowding and heat waves are correlated, we cannot make the conclusion that beach overcrowding causes heat waves. In this case, the flaw is obvious. Hot temperatures cause people to go to the beach and not the other way around. On a similar note, consider this example. While studying the reading levels of elementary students, researchers discovered that, on average, the longer a child's foot, the higher his or her reading level. Therefore, foot growth increases one's reading level. Once again, foot length and reading level are correlated, but we cannot conclude that one causes the other. In this example, there's a third variable that affects both foot length and reading level. That variable is age. As children get older, both their shoe size and their reading ability increase. Okay, the next flaw to watch out for is confusing numbers with rates. For example, consider this argument. Last year, 10 people were murdered in Happyton, and 100 people were murdered in Killington. Therefore, it is much safer to live in Happyton than in Killington. Here the author is confusing numbers with rates. To determine which city is safer, we must determine the murder rate, not the number of murders. For example, if both cities had the same population, we can see that the murder rate in Happyton is less than the murder rate in Killington, in which case it might be reasonable to conclude that Happyton is safer than Killington. However, if the population of Happyton were 25 and the population of Killington were 10 million, then it would be unreasonable to conclude that Happyton is safer. Okay, the next flaw to watch out for is the conclusion mismatch. Here the author takes premises about one thing and draws a conclusion about something else. Here's an example. Last year, hundreds of postal workers in Maltania suffered back injuries from carrying heavy packages at the sorting stations. To help reduce these injuries, the government should introduce a law that prohibits people from mailing packages that are over 3 feet in length. Here, the problem is that the premise tells us that the weight of the packages is causing the injuries, but the conclusion is about the size of the packages. Now, weight and size are not necessarily the same. A relatively small package can still weigh a lot, and it is possible to have a very large package that weighs very little. So as you're reading the passage, watch out for any new words in the conclusion. This will often indicate a conclusion mismatch. Next, another common flaw is the extreme conclusion. In this flaw, the author takes weak premises and then draws a very strong conclusion. Take this example. In some countries, raising the minimum wage can help boost the economy. So if Mauritania raises its minimum wage, its economy will improve. Here we are told that in some, but not all, countries, raising the minimum wage can help the economy. Now, while this evidence is somewhat uncertain, the conclusion says that the economy will improve. Given such weak evidence, this conclusion is far too strong, so watch out for this. Okay, the next flaw we'll examine is mistaking necessary for sufficient. Here the author assumes that if some necessary condition is met, then something will occur. For example, in order to be a great science teacher, one must have a deep understanding of biology. Since Terence has a deep understanding of biology, he must be a great science teacher. In this argument, the premise says that to be a great science teacher, it is necessary to have a deep understanding of biology. However, a deep understanding of biology could be one of many necessary requirements to being a great science teacher. Presumably, some other necessary attributes would include a deep understanding of chemistry and physics, strong teaching skills, a good work ethic, a desire to teach, and so on. So even though Terence meets one necessary condition, we cannot conclude that he meets all of the necessary conditions. Alright, another common flaw is guilty by association. Here the author assumes that if two entities share some qualities, then they must share all qualities. For example, Sharon, Margaret, and Rena are tall, hooped-and-high students who play basketball. Since Maureen is a tall, hooped-and-high student, she must play basketball. Since Maureen shares some characteristics with the three girls, the author incorrectly concludes that she must share additional characteristics. Alright, the last flaw we'll examine is the unrepresentative sample. Here, the author takes statistical information about a sample and makes a conclusion about an entire population. For example, recently a questionnaire was given to the inhabitants of Captain, Mauritania's capital city. 83% of respondents said that they own one or more horses. Therefore, we can conclude that most people in Mauritania own one or more horses. The biggest problem with statistical arguments is that the sample may not be representative of the entire population. In this example, it is possible that the people of Captain do not accurately represent the entire population of the country of Mauritania. Okay, so those are some common flaws to watch out for. Now let's summarize. In this lesson, we learned the strategy for solving flawed argument questions on the GMAT.